get into this conversation now. December 9 marks International Anti-Corruption Day. Now, the United Nations says the day is intended to highlight the link between anti-corruption and peace, security and development. Well, let's get some perspective now around this, and we are joined by Public Service Commission Chairperson Dr. Somadoda Fikeni. That's someone I have known for a very long time to give us political commentary. Unfortunately, you've deprived us of that, Fikeni, but nonetheless, good morning to you, and it's good to talk to you. Talk to us about this particular day. What is the significance of this day, and I think more so for South Africa, which is saddled with this cancer of corruption?
Going back to 2003, the United Nations realized that corruption was such a massive problem in the stability of the world, in the well-being of the world, that it was subsequently declared in the General Assembly as the Anti-Corruption Day, that is the 9th of December. And countries were asked to mark this day with activities which mark this, but it should not be confined to a day. So the Public Service Commission annually normally have this day. In partnership with the UN, and the scale and the scope of reports around corruption culminating with the Zondo report, we decided to do something unprecedented and extraordinary for this day, which will be there for 2 days.
Yeah. And talking about corruption, how would you describe the situation in the country right now in its fight against corruption? Are we doing well? Are we doing far better than perhaps we would have in the latter years? Or are we still tracking ever so slow?
Well, I do think that the one thing, corruption is still endemic in the country. It was even there during the pan to the country. So corruption is still endemic. What is beginning to happen is that after the several reports on corruption, whether by me...
All right, let's try and take you back to that discussion with Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, reminding you that December 9 marks International Anti-Corruption Day. Now, the United Nations saying the day provides an opportunity for political leaders, governments, legal bodies and lobby groups to join hands against corruption. Well, let's try and get Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, who is the chairperson at the Public Service Commission. He's back again. Dr. Fikeni, I'm sorry about that. The connection was simply not playing ball. Let's pick up on the response you were giving. I think the question was, where is South Africa on the score of fighting corruption? Are we doing better than we have in the previous years, or than we have been, rather?
Well, I do think that corruption levels are still very high in the public sector, in the private sector, in civil society. But what has changed is that people's awareness after these corruption reports have become higher. And this is also linked to some of the difficulties inflicted by the collapse of institutions and the taxes and all kinds of levies being raised and people not receiving services, that they are beginning to make a direct connection to corruption. So that in itself has made the work of the reforms, introduction of professionalization of public service, introduction of lifestyle audit, introduction of various anti-corruption bodies, it is making that life rather easy than it was before, because people now can connect corruption to the inconvenience and the pain inflicted on them.
Yeah. You talk about the collapse of institutions. As I speak to you right now, Dr. Fikeni, on the side of the screen, Eskom is telling us that we are back at stage 6. Now, this is the much dreaded stage, and this is what usually galvanizes our leaders to say, no, we can't be going to stage 6 because perhaps the next stage after that will be stage 8. The collapse of institutions like ESCOM, when you place the corruption score on it, we often hear people saying, no, corruption is a victimless crime. But actually, can you paint a picture for us of just how bad corruption is if you were to use the ESCOM example?
The ESCOM example is most dramatic when you think that in 2001, around that time, ESCOM was ranked higher than the sovereign rating. And I think it was ranked as one of the best state-owned companies in the world. Fast forward, ESCOM is having all kinds of challenges now. Yes, load shedding is a lot more complex. There are many other factors, such as having to build new power plants, but the reality is that corruption has been identified as one of the critical factors. We used to have South African Airways flying everywhere. Again, it was grounded precisely because, among other things, corruption, patronage networks, and you go on to Denel, it was one of the leading producers of arms globally, including the most advanced technologies. It collapsed because, in the main, misgovernance and corruption. Then you do have even the dispensing of the unemployment insurance funds during the crisis of COVID, the dispensing of 350 rands, many other things afflicted again. You go on to post services, you go on to many other home affairs, the issuance of permits. So the scale and the damage could be in trillions. But once you look at who is the worst victim of this, it is the poorest of the poor.
And when you say that, Dr. Fikeni, that the most vulnerable victim is the one who is so poor, I can't forget a story that was reported recently, and it was a family that said their child was relying on the oxygen tank, and because of this constant bouts of load shedding, I think that child, and I stand corrected here, but the article seemed to suggest that that child would have been deprived of this oxygen because it's got to be connected, I think, at some point, or at least uploaded with the help of electricity. It's quite sad, but talk to us about law enforcement and how, as a country, we are doing on that score where the people of South Africa see the consequences for those who have been engaged in corruption. Do you think that there is a level of satisfaction from members of the public that something is being done to hold those who have had long fingers accountable?
Well, I do think that we should give credit to law enforcement despite all the challenges which are there, including some of the corrupt elements within. Because when you look at the tens of thousands of people being put in prison on continuous basis, but the organized crime element, we're beginning to see now responses. We're beginning to see prominent names being brought in. But it is the whole ecosystem of how the law enforcement, how public service, how accountability bodies work together, and how the judiciary works, and how the oversight bodies, including Parliament, works, that you'll begin to see a real dent in this. We were told that more police are going to be recruited. We are told that you have many other people now in line for prosecution. Let's watch and wait and see. But people are growing impatient because they think this is a drop given the deluge of corruption reports that we've seen, to the point where you find that this has become pervasive. There is one dramatic example when in Mpumalanga and elsewhere we were told the people who are dealing with the car licensing were having a protest because they think bribes have gone up. And that in itself is telling on how our statecraft has been so undermined to a point where we may start blaming witchcraft, when in fact the common sense is to build the capacity of the state.
Let's conclude the conversation, Dr. Fikeni, and talk about the much vaunted cadre deployment policy. The suggestions, strong suggestions being made that government is finally making good on this promise, and that is to do away with cadre deployment in the state in order for it to function. And it's interesting that you end your last point on that score about just how bad the situation is in the public space. Do you think that that is perhaps a direction that is going to take us ever so slowly but gradually away from politics of patronage, but also importantly to give us a well-functioning public system with professionals sitting at the front desk and at the top of the food chain?
I do think that the approval by Cabinet of the framework for professionalization of public service is a groundbreaking exercise. But this is just the beginning, because the approval of various policies which will make sure that people are appointed on the basis of competence, not loyalty, not part of any patronage network, and that public service, which is ethical and capable, is professional enough to deal with any political changes, coalition arrangements, and so forth, because to them, they are simply making sure that the state functions, administrations will come and go. If that is implemented and the policies that are meant to make that real are implemented and championed as such, PSC, Public Service Commission, has committed to work with all various role players to make sure that that is actually realized, because it is the only way that we can be insulated from all kinds of wrong appointments of people who do not qualify.
Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, let me thank you very much for your time.